tools for managing your anger. So what we've seen as we've looked in this series is that complex trauma adds a dimension to the topic of anger that unless you understand it, you end up falling over and over again. And what it has done is created this volcano where there's a whole bunch of lava down below the surface. That's all of the anger of the years of being a kid stuffed down that you weren't allowed to express. And then now today you get things that trigger eruptions, and that's the second part of the anger. So what we ended last week with was tools or things that you need to be aware of in order to start reducing the total amount of lava down below the surface. So you got to deal with resentments, you got to deal with losses, you got to deal with shame, all of those things we talked about. Tonight I want to switch to the eruption of the anger and begin tools on how to control that eruption. Now, I can't cover it all in one night because it's the hardest part, so we're going to do it in 2 nights. But tonight I want to just introduce to you this idea of learning to manage that anger. So what we're going to see is that everybody has their own pattern that takes place when the anger happens. So to give you an idea, the anger's in the middle. At the top, there's a trigger. So something triggers your anger. And that's that nanosecond trigger where you go from 0 to 100. And then within that nanosecond, you get these physical sensations. Something changes in your thoughts. Other emotions come into play, and you act out in a nanosecond. And so what we're going to do tonight is try to break down that nanosecond, to try and understand what for you, step by step, happens in that nanosecond so that you are self-aware. And what you're going to see is that you have a pattern that takes place in that nanosecond, and it is possible to stop that pattern if you can catch it early enough. Now, you know, if you don't catch it early enough, well, it's too late. You're not going to be able to rein that steed in. So you got to get it in the early stages. And so this self-awareness of your patterns is a huge part of beginning to change the anger story of your life. Now, again, let me emphasize that when you get triggered by your anger, your brain releases cortisol, which adds to the intensity, which adds to the escalation, and makes it even more difficult to stop the pattern from carrying through. And so this is where most people find tons of discouragement, tons of difficulty. So what I say to people is this: don't expect to get it perfectly the first time. When you come to anger, expect that you're probably going to fail the first few times, but if you can learn something in each time where you begin to identify your pattern with greater clarity, then the next time you have a better chance of catching yourself before you go all the way down that road, which is so destructive. So this is a self-awareness evening. You might want to kind of check off as we go through these things that happen in a nanosecond and see if you can begin to spot your pattern. So we're going to begin with the triggers. The things that trigger your anger. Now, there are hundreds of things that can trigger your anger, and I want you to know that. I'm not going to go through hundreds of the triggers, but you can begin to get the main triggers in your mind, the things that trigger you with the greatest intensity. So let me just talk about that intensity thing. Some triggers are more intense than others. Sometimes the intensity of the trigger is dependent on who triggers you or the event that triggers you. So if somebody you hardly know says something to you, it might not bother you, but if your mom says it to you, you're got World War III happening. So the trigger is something that happens by a person, what they say or do, or an event, and that has an effect on how intense it becomes. So let me begin with probably one of the biggest triggers, which is injustice. A child in complex trauma has all kinds of things that aren't fair or just. Dad does things that are wrong, that are hurtful, and nobody ever makes him pay. He gets away with it. You get abused, nobody resolves that situation or heals it or fixes it. So you live with injustice all the time, but you got to push it down. You just don't know what to do with it. You can't resolve it. Getting angry only gets more pain because you get punished. And so injustice becomes a hot button for you today. And so I see a lot of people, why they have trouble with resentments and forgiving people is because that justice thing. That person deserves to pay. I've gone on my whole life without people paying, and I want them to pay. So injustice can trigger a lot of anger. With that, whenever you see somebody who's a corrupt cop or a corrupt politician or somebody in authority who's corrupt and abusing their authority, anger, because that's injustice, that's not fair. That's why for a lot of people with complex trauma, that injustice thing is so big that they spend their life taking on causes. They're going to save the whales, they're going to save the earth, they're going to save everything, and they get super passionate whenever they see injustice, or they get really worked up by politics and all of the crazy stuff that happens within that. So injustice might be a big thing for you. Next one, somebody that lies to you or cheats on you. Big explosion. Next one, disrespect. Now, disrespect, what I have found, it takes there's all kinds of versions of disrespect. So just imagine that somebody's talking to you in a patronizing way. They're talking to you like you're a 6-year-old, patting you on the head, poor little kid, you're so stupid. And you get all worked up because that to you is disrespect. If anybody questions you or rolls their eyes or contradicts you, you feel they're trying to make you look stupid and you get angry. That's disrespect. If you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden they start walking away, then that's disrespect. So there are hundreds of disrespect things that you might have picked up. I ask clients all the time, how does your mom have to look at you in order for you to feel disrespected? And they can think of 10 different ways. Mom can look at them, give them that eyeball, give them that eyebrow, whatever, and they're disrespected. So all of those things can trigger you today. And it's, I think, very important to understand is that triggers, once again, are connected to wounds from the past that you've never totally healed from. So that when you get triggered, it exposes that old wound and anger rushes in to protect you. And so that's what's going on with that. Next one, people teasing you, and you might have had a name that you were called when you were a kid and made fun of you. If you hear that name now, that can just send you spiraling, and it can make you very angry. If you see people bullying other people, or if you see somebody being bullied, that can get you really angry in a hurry because you went through that. Embarrassment. Sometimes we refer to anger as a secondary emotion. And there's different meanings for that, but one meaning for that is this. If there are certain emotions that you don't want to feel, the primary thing, the primary emotion like embarrassment, you don't want to feel it, so you quickly turn it into anger, so it's a secondary emotion to cover the primary emotion. And so embarrassment is one that many people, as soon as they feel embarrassed, they flip it to anger, and then they don't feel embarrassed anymore. That's the purpose there. If you are around people who are so immature and they act so stupid, you're embarrassed to be in the same room as them, you can get angry in a hurry. Or people that just don't get it. Probably one of the reasons you can get angry at your parents who still don't get addiction, because they just don't get it. And you try to explain your complex trauma and they just don't get it. They say, but you had such a good childhood. And they don't get it, and that pushes an anger button. Self-righteous hypocrites. Some of you, I just have to say that, and you're getting all worked up. People who don't respect your boundaries. So you say, stop texting me, and they just keep texting you. You say, please don't call me. They keep calling you. And you get angry when people don't respect your boundaries. Being with people who say they care, but they're totally insensitive to your needs. That can get you fired up in a hurry. Being around very selfish people who get away with it. Nobody ever holds them accountable. Everybody enables them to continue to be selfish. And then if your shame or your guilt get triggered. So your shame is, I'm not good enough. You can turn that into anger. Your guilt, you can turn that into anger on yourself, beating yourself up, putting yourself down, anger turned inward. And then if you experience any type of rejection, neglect, anything that feels like abandonment, that can be a super intense trigger of anger. And then sometimes a slower building one is a stress. But then the minute you feel overwhelmed, so the stress builds and builds, and then you feel overwhelmed, and then the anger is triggered in a big way. So I don't know which of those trigger you. Maybe all of them do. But the very first part of the process of self-awareness with anger is beginning to know your anger triggers. So that when you're angry, you can stop yourself and say, why am I angry? And then you can say, I feel disrespected. And then you can look not at the anger, but at the wound, the hurt underneath. And then you can work on healing that. So that becomes an important part of the process. This is going to take a lot of months, even years, to gradually get this picture in place. But triggers is where you start. The next thing is what happens in your body once your anger is triggered. So what is very interesting is when your anger is triggered, the things that happen in your body are identical to when you go into survival mode because of great fear. So what happens in great fear and great anger? All of your body says, we got to get ready for fight or flight. So we're going to breathe deeper. We're going to breathe more quickly. We're going to sweat because adrenaline is going to start to pump. Our muscles are going to get tense, ready to fight or flight. It affects your heart. It affects your lungs. It affects your muscles. Everything is in fight or flight mode. And so the same thing that happens in survival mode is what happens in anger mode. So some of the symptoms that you might have experienced, and these ones often are the more slow building anger ones, but you start to feel this tingling inside of you, and then your heart starts beating faster, and you can feel it beating out of your chest. Sometimes you can feel your chest tighten or your muscles tighten. And then others, they can just feel their blood pressure go up. And sometimes with that, you get a headache or you feel pressure in your sinuses or in your head because your blood pressure's gone up. Others, when it goes up, it's like they get tunnel vision. They lose their periphery vision. And they just see this tunnel. Some, they see a tunnel, but they have kind of stars out here in the periphery. And that's usually like extreme anger taking over. And then you can get super tired afterwards. So those are some of the bodily things. So if your anger is slowly building and you see some of those body things happening, you can go, what's going on here? I'm getting angry. Why am I getting angry? What triggered it? And then you can start to process it. So bodily sensations. Now, the next thing I want you to realize, and this is now we're breaking down the nanosecond. What you're going to see is your anger affects you physically, intellectually, emotionally, attitudinally, perspective, and how you act. It affects every part of your life in a nanosecond. So in that nanosecond, you just think your emotion of anger is going through the roof, but at the very same time, something's happening in your brain. And your brain is being greatly influenced by cortisol. So the first thing you have to understand about cortisol is when cortisol pumps into your brain, it shuts down your thinking part of your brain, your cortex, because you're in survival mode, and it is saying we don't have time to think about options here. We have to act. So let's not think, let's go limbic, which is all about action based on intense emotion. And so that part of your brain gets all messed up, the thinking part of your brain, and we're going to talk about that. So what happens with that? Your thinking part of your brain gets distorted. You think you're seeing everything clearly, but you're not. And so many of you have acted in those moments when you think you see everything clearly, and then the next morning when you've cooled down and wake up, you go, oh, did I ever get it wrong? That happens because your cortex has been affected negatively by the anger, and your perception of reality becomes distorted. So that's why one of the biggest tools is going to be learning to de-escalate your anger and getting your cortex on track or online again so you can think clearly. What you do in that distorted place is you distort what's happening, you distort what you think is causing the hurt, and you often distort what you think the person's motives are who's hurt you. And all of that is wrapped up in the distortion. Next thing is whenever you're angry, you always think you're right. Do you realize that anger makes you self-righteous without even realizing it? So in that nanosecond, all of a sudden you're the only right person in the world, everybody else is wrong. And that happens in your brain. A lot of people then go to this worst case scenario. That person didn't answer my text, they're cheating on me. And boom, you've gone there in a nanosecond. All within your brain. Distorted, but it feels right. And then you obsess. So you can't sleep that night because your brain is replaying how that person hurt me and what you're going to do for revenge. And you're going through all of that stuff in your brain, and you're actually enjoying it. Partly, the revenge part. But the other part of the hurt just gets you angry, more angry, and more angry. So first thing I want you to realize this. All of these things that are going to happen in your thinking, your emotions, and your actions, they're limbic brain responses. If you give in to them, they'll make you feel a little wee bit better right now, but they'll feed your anger and make it worse. So these proposed solutions of your limbic brain, if you give in to them, make you more angry. And then you're feeding off of all of this stuff. So just be aware of this. One of the things that happens for all of us is as we fall asleep at night, our brain starts to relax. Do you want to know what often happens when your brain starts to relax? Is you stop or you take down all your brain boundaries about, I'm not going to think about that, I'm not going to think about that, and all that, and those start coming down. Guess what you start thinking about when you're going to sleep? That person hurt me. I'm mad, and now you can't sleep because your brain just got all fired up again. So be aware of going to bed when you start to relax, that can often be when your anger reignites. And then a lot of people, if they don't deal with that anger right away, what's going to happen an hour later, the next day, is they're going to go to a negative place in their head. And now they're going to start finding fault with everything. And so what your brain is doing is looking for things that will prove or support and prove that your anger is justified. So I'm going to find something wrong with everybody, and that will give me an excuse to continue to be so angry. And so you begin to change that in your mind. So I hope you realize that if you give in to any of those thoughts, they make your anger even worse. They feed into greater anger. Now, your emotions. So in that nanosecond, a whole bunch of things happen in your emotions. So you got a lot of anger, but with that comes a bunch of other negative emotions. So now you just hate that person. Now you want to hurt that person. Now you think you're better than that person, and you shut down all your loving emotions and close your heart to that person. In a nanosecond, you can do that. And then if you don't deal with it, the next morning you wake up and you feel guilty for what you said and did. Your shame comes back because you go, I'm so useless, I keep failing everybody, I'm no good, I'm not good enough, all of that. And then your fear kicks in. Will they leave me? Have I done it too often now? This is the last chance I've been given. They're going to be gone. Or I'm hopeless. I'm trying and trying and trying to fix my anger problems, and I keep failing. What's the point? You realize that every single one of those emotions is negative. And you can go there, and you can beat yourself up, and you can get down on yourself, and it's only going to make it all worse. So you don't feel those emotions while you're feeling anger, because anger trumps all those emotions. But they're there under the surface, and they will come out the next morning, and you'll feel them then, but there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So part of all of those emotions that I mentioned already, but I want to emphasize again, is this. There's a hurt down there. And that's the part you can miss. That's the part you can overlook, and you just think you're angry. You want to get the feelings that go with the hurt. Then you can begin to deal with it. Okay, now you go into actions. Fight, flight, freeze. Now what's absolutely amazing to me, and I don't know if you're kind of sitting there thinking about this at this moment, it is absolutely amazing that your brain can process so many things in that nanosecond. Isn't that just, it blows your mind, the ability of your brain, and that most of those things happen at a subconscious level. You're not even aware that they're happening. And so that's part of why we have to become self-aware, because we can't change something if it's subconscious. We're not aware of it. We can only change it once we become aware of it. So let's go fight, flight, or freeze. So fight, anger, fight, I'm going to hurt you back. You might have hurt me, but you're going to pay for it. So you act aggressively to that person, verbally, emotionally, physically. You can do all of that. One of the things that a lot of clients realize is that when you're angry, all the filters that you have that you're about what your speech should be like, well, they just disappear. So you say, I'm never going to be disrespectful to my partner. When you're angry, oh, skip that filter, I'm going to be disrespectful. I'm not going to call my partner a whole bunch of swear words when I'm angry. But then when you're angry, skip that rule. I'm going to give them all the swear words I can think of, and even more besides. So anger gets you to take down boundaries internally. So you can set all kinds of boundaries, but when you're mad enough, you don't care about those boundaries anymore. And all self-restraint goes out the window. Next one, maybe you do that lashing out verbally, and you're still angry after that. So the next day you don't lash out verbally, you get just good at sniper shooting them. Little shots through the day that are just put downs, sharp, sometimes put in humor, but you're sniping. You're taking shots at them because your anger is still there. Another action, it's not directed necessarily to the person that hurt you, but when you're angry, remember those internal boundaries go away? One of the things that people do when they're angry is they become impulsive. I'm so mad at you, I'm going to go get drunk. Now, you didn't think that through very long. You did it because you're angry. And you're impulsive. And so when you're angry is when you're often in the greatest danger of making rash, dumb decisions. And you do it without thinking, and then it's too late. So again, what you're seeing is anger takes all my normal internal boundaries and threatens them. So I have to figure out how to stick to those in those anger episodes. Next one, a lot of people, once they become angry, they lash out, But then they become more demanding on the other person, more controlling, or they become rigid. We're going to do it my way, no discussion. We're not talking about this. This is the way it is. And you become that military general who is totally inflexible, and then you demand everybody suit you, which means you become a narcissist. And you require everybody to do what you want. Others, they don't take snipe shots or lash out. They just go, I'll show you, I'm not talking to you. And they go on a silent treatment. Or they go on a pouting little journey. Or they isolate from everybody and they don't want to talk. Or some of you, you're not going to lash out at them, but you're going to go on Facebook and you're going to broadcast what that person just did to you so that everybody in Winnipeg and around the world knows about your hurt. And you are acting again from your limbic brain with all your boundaries gone. So I don't know if you're seeing some of your patterns here of how you act out or what you do behavior-wise when you're angry. Many people, when you're angry, you feel self-righteous, but then you go, you know what, I got to prove I'm right. So I'm going to recruit support. I'm going to go talk to all my friends and get them to agree with me that that person's a jerk and I was wrong, and they're going to support my self-righteousness. So you go on a recruiting expedition. So all of those things can be part of your pattern. So what I want you to see is you can have intellectual patterns. You can get negative. You can get revenge thinking, obsessive thinking. You can start beating up yourself, tearing yourself down. Then you can get all these emotional patterns, and then you can act out with these behavior patterns. All of that happens in a nanosecond. So again, those patterns made you feel better for just a few seconds. And if you gave into them, you always feel worse afterwards. They do not resolve the problem in a healthy way. They do not resolve the hurt or the anger in a healthy way. They make the anger worse. So that becomes the issue. And then if you don't deal with it, the temptation is, I'm going to turn the anger into resentment, and I'm going to keep my heart closed to that person. The problem is if you're in an intimate relationship with them, if you keep your heart closed more than a couple days, you are starting to erode the intimacy, the trust, and the respect of that relationship, and a lot of damage can begin to happen after a couple days. So that is the dangerous stuff. Okay, so let's switch to tools very quickly. What do we do in that nanosecond? Well, do you realize that what you're doing is in a nanosecond, instead of following this well-trained, ingrained, entrenched, reinforced pattern that you've done thousands of times, you're saying, I'm going to choose a different direction. In that nanosecond, you're making a choice to respond in a different way. You go, that's not a lot of time to change my mind. And that's why you need awareness of the earliest signs of the pattern so that you can catch it and hopefully start to change it to a healthier behavior. Second thing that makes it so difficult is that when anger is there and you've reinforced it, the pull it has on you is all negative, but it feels like gravity. It feels like you're caught in a fast-moving current that's pulling you to those old behaviors. So what you're doing, big picture, is I feel all this pull, but I'm going to fight against it and go the other way. I don't say that to discourage you. I say that to just, once again, help you realize how difficult this is. So if you were coming hoping for 3 easy steps to get over your anger, you came to the wrong place. This is going to be one of the hardest battles that you've had to undertake. Seneca, a famous philosopher of many years ago, said, anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes us. So what he's saying is this: when you get injured, yeah, that does damage. But what you do with the anger often does even more damage than the original injury. So that should be an incentive to say, I'm tired of being injured and then doing more damage myself. I have to figure this out. So here's Tim's sound advice, great advice. Point 1, bite your tongue. How's that? Your excuse for the evening. Bite your tongue. Now, let me just say a couple of things about that, because some of you would bite her right off. Some people say to me, well, isn't that stuffing my anger? And I go, biting your tongue is not necessarily stuffing your anger. What it is saying is, I'm not in a place where I can deal or express or resolve my anger in a healthy way right now. So I got to bite my tongue so I don't do something I regret. But once I cool down, I'll come back to deal with it in a healthy way. So it is not stuffing, it is stopping it temporarily till you're in a better headspace. So how do you do that? We call that grounding, de-escalating, one of the hardest things to do when the anger escalates you 0 to 100 in a nanosecond. Okay, everybody's got to figure out their own de-escalating things that work for them, but here are some things that can be helpful, that help some. Number 1, just different types of exercises that help you calm down. So some do breathing exercises. Some engage all of their 5 senses to get them out of the limbic brain. So what am I feeling? What am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I hearing? What am I tasting? Just to get them into the cortex. Others, they review different facts, like hockey teams, to get them into the cortex. So the idea is I got to get out of the limbic, back into the cortex. What are ways that will help me do that? So that is something you just have to figure out for yourself. Some people realize this: I can't de-escalate if I'm in the same room with the person, because I still got to look at them, and that's going to keep me escalated. So I got to get out of that room or go for a walk, because that is the only way I will be able to de-escalate. And so sometimes you have to say to your partner, I have to go for a walk, not because I don't want to deal with this, not because I'm disrespecting you, not any of that. I need to cool down. And I can't do that here. Now be aware that sometimes once you walk, you just start replaying it in your mind, and then you're walking faster and faster and faster as you're getting angry and angry and angrier. So you have to be aware of your own little pitfalls that you're prone to with each of these possible helps or tools. Other people find it helpful to get it by themselves and journal. And they go through what's happening here. What's the hurt under my anger? What do I see? Because I want to see it accurately. Again, that can be very helpful for some, but for others, they go starting to write, and pretty soon smoke's coming off the end of your pen because you are pushing so hard and writing so hard because you're getting angrier. That might be necessary then to go to the next option and talk to somebody that can help you process it. Now, there's a danger with this one too, because who do we normally talk to when we're angry? Everybody's going to support our anger and make us more angry. So you might have to talk to somebody who might disagree with you and say, you know what? This isn't their problem. This is your stuff. And you don't want to hear that. You want everybody to say, oh, poor you. You have a right to be angry. But you need somebody you know is wise enough and strong enough to be able to look objectively at the situation and be able to give you feedback. One of the things that I've found as a counselor, when couples want to come for marriage counseling, I'll get, let's say, the wife come in, and I finish the counseling session. I go, she's married to a monster. Wow. Then the guy comes in the next week, and I go, he's a nice guy. Wonder who that lady was married to. But man, he's married to a monster. So what you begin to realize is there's their truth, and then somewhere in there, there's the real truth. And that's what you got to try to figure out. And you need often somebody to help you begin to do that. Okay, so that's, like I said, just the introduction to dealing with this. So next week we're going to go, okay, I've calmed myself down. Now what do I do next? And then we're going to spend the evening on processing all of the different things you need to process with your anger. But that's the end of part 1. We're going to have Reagan come back and sing, and then we'll go to the Christian part. If you don't want to stay for that, you're free to go. Enjoy your long weekend. Thanks for being part of our... Thank you again, Reagan. Okay, last week I told you I was going to tell you some Bible stories of angry people, and I'm going to do that again tonight. What we have talked about and talk about regularly is complex trauma results quite often in people becoming narcissists just as a way to survive. And then we talked about tonight how anger tends to make us a narcissist. So tonight I want to tell you a story of 2 angry narcissists. And the problem is they're married to each other. So King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Now you may have heard of Jezebel. She doesn't have a very good reputation. But King Ahab was one of the worst kings in Israel. And he married a woman named Jezebel who was even more evil than just about anybody in Israel's history. So they were not a good couple, but they were severe narcissists. And so what we're going to get tonight is what happens when a narcissist doesn't get what they want. They get angry. And what happens if you get a severe narcissist that wants something really badly and somebody says no to them? They get really angry, really angry. So here's the story of what happened tonight. And I'll just read you the intro. It says there's a man named Naboth, and he owned a vineyard right beside the palace of King Ahab. And one day King Ahab goes to Naboth and he says, since your vineyard is so convenient to my place, I would like to buy it from you and use it as a vegetable garden. I will give you a better vineyard in exchange, or if you prefer, I will pay you for it. In other words, this is a deal that you can't refuse. You're either going to get more money than you should, or you're going to get a better vineyard. It's a great deal. But Naboth replies, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance that was passed down by my ancestors. In other words, sorry, king, the answer is no. Now, why does he say no? Because to us sitting in Canada, we go, I take that deal. That's a great deal. Here's what Naboth is very aware of, okay? In Jewish or Israel's history, God made it very clear to Israel that he owned all the land and he was just letting them use it. They were stewards of his land. Therefore, they couldn't do with it whatever they wanted because technically they did not own it. And then the second thing, God had said clearly through Joshua when they took over this land of Israel, is that God was going to give each family a piece of land. And that piece of land was to stay within that family for the rest of that family's existence. So that was going to be where they lived. That was going to be where they farmed. That was their thing. They could not get rid of it. It had to stay within the family. So what Naboth is saying is, God doesn't allow me to get rid of this land because it's technically not mine. Now, they did have one occasion where you could sell your land, and that was if you were so poor you had to put your children into slavery to pay the bills, and you didn't want to do that. You could sell your land at that point in time, but here was the condition. Every 50 years in Israel, they have the year of Jubilee. And on the year of Jubilee, whoever bought that land has to give it back to you. Isn't that a great real estate investment? Buy my land and then give it back to me once the 50-year year of Jubilee. So if you bought it in the 48th year, you're going to own that land for 2 years, and then you're giving it back. So you would pay for that land based on how much time remained before the year of Jubilee. So basically, again, Naboth is saying this, I will follow God's way. And what you're going to find out with Naboth is he was a follower of God in a nation that at that point in time, 90% of the people didn't care about God at all. They were interested in money, they were interested in sex and all kinds of indulgences, and they weren't following God. So Naboth is one of these rare people that is still trusting and following God, and that made him one of the best citizens in Israel. He was a model citizen, an honest, caring person. But he doesn't give King Ahab what he wants. So here's what Ahab does. So Ahab went home angry. And here's his pattern. He becomes sullen, which means he started pouting. So he sat on his throne with his lower lip dragging on the floor, feeling sorry for himself, mad at this little peon guy that wouldn't give him his stuff. And the king went to bed with his face to the wall and refused to eat. And you go, you're sure you're the king? You're sounding like a 3-year-old. But that's what happened. So along comes Queen Jezebel. So we got Narcissists' husband, doesn't get his own way, goes into a great big pout. Jezebel comes in and says, what's the matter? What's made you so upset that you're not eating? And he does his little sob. I asked Naboth to sell me his vineyard or trade it, but he refused. Woe is me, poor me. And she goes, are you the king of Israel or not? Get up and eat something. So she's kind of acting like a tough mom. Don't worry about it. I'll get you Naboth's vineyard. So now we got narcissist number 2. So what you're going to see with Jezebel is this woman thought she was above all rules. She didn't care about what God said or anybody said. She was the law to herself. Because she was the ultimate authority in the land, she thought she could take whatever she wanted just because she wanted it. She did not care about the people. She only cared about herself. And that was fueled by a greed and anger that made her willing to do whatever injustice she felt necessary to get what she wanted. So here's what she does in her mind. She says, the only way I can get this land is Naboth has to die. Then the land could go out of the family. But I can't just grab it, because everybody will know I'm being greedy. And I can't go over there and kill him, because everybody will be mad at me, because he's a model citizen. So how do I kill a model citizen and nobody know it's me? I got to be sneaky. And Jezebel is one of the sneakiest narcissists you'll ever find. And so she starts to concoct a scheme or a plan that will let her kill Naboth, but make it look like she had no part of it. Okay, so here's what she's going to play off of. She writes letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his seal, sent them to the elders and other leaders of the town where Naboth lived. In her letters she commanded, call the citizens together for a time of fasting. Now in Israel, a time of fasting was when everybody was so sorry that God had been dishonored. So it was a way of public repentance. We want to be connected back to God so badly that we're not even able to eat. So here's what I want you to understand. Guess what she's doing? She's acting like she cares about God and his laws. She's playing on the natural desires of people for justice, for right living. Do you ever notice that a gang leader or a corrupt politician, when they talk to the news cameras, they always sound virtuous and that they really care and that they are concerned about right and wrong and helping people? Meanwhile, they're stabbing everybody behind their back. But she's going to put on the very virtuous thing. So call them for a time of fasting and bring Naboth and put him in a place of honor. So set it up to make it look like you're going to honor this model citizen, and that he maybe is the most virtuous of you because you're fasting, because you're all disobeying God, but he's not, okay? So set this up so that Naboth is going, wow, I'm being honored here. This feels good, okay? Now she's setting him up for a bigger fall. And then seat 2 scoundrels across from him who will accuse him of cursing God and the king, and then take him out and stone him to death. So here's what's going on in our mind. In the Jewish law, if you were to curse God, now that doesn't mean swear, it means that you are so angry at God, you close your heart to God, and you do everything you can to destroy God and the love of God in others. So accuse him of that. And in the Jewish law, when a person got to that point, God said that deserves the death penalty, okay? So get rid of that cancer. So if a person cursed God, there was the death penalty. Second condition is you couldn't just have one person say, he cursed God, kill him. You had to have 2 or 3 witnesses to agree. Then you would have enough witnesses to support the initial charge, and then they could be stoned to death. So she can't bring the charge to herself, so she pays 2 scoundrels. And that means 2 lowlifes who are all about doing whatever necessary to make a few bucks, even lying, cheating, stealing. And so she pays a couple of them, and she says, I want you to go and stand up and say, I heard Naboth curse God. And everybody's going to say, no, not Naboth. And the second person will stand up and say, yes, I heard him too. Now you got 2 witnesses. And then people would say, okay, let's act. And so it says he was dragged outside the town and stoned to death. And when Jezebel heard the news, she said to Ahab, you know the vineyard Naboth wouldn't sell you? Well, you can have it now. He's dead. So Ahab immediately went down to the vineyard of Naboth to claim it. Now, I want you to understand 2 things out of this, okay? Number 1, if you have a true narcissist who's all about themselves, you get that person angry, they're willing to do almost anything cruel, even in some cases murder, in order to get what they want. So a narcissist, a true narcissist, when they get angry, becomes a super narcissist. And when they become a super narcissist, they are willing to go to the extremes in behavior to get what they want, even to hurting or killing somebody. And I think most of you know people who've done that, or even yourself who has done that. Second thing that I want you to get, when we get angry, even if you're not a narcissist, anger makes us into narcissists. And all of a sudden we want what we want. We don't care about your needs, your feelings, your whatever. All I want is what I want, and I am going to get it. And so the danger of anger is that it changes us, and not in a good way. And for people from complex trauma, that change can take them to dark places that they can never get out of, and they can regret but never take back. And so all of that to say this. Do you want to know what happened with Ahab and Jezebel? The prophet came to Ahab the next day, and he was going on a tour of his new vineyard. He was checking it out and enjoying his new possession. And now he didn't even have to pay for it or swap for it. He had this all sitting on his lap, and he was enjoying it. And God's prophet or God's preachers turned up, and he said, because you've done this, and you killed another person, a righteous person, to get what you want, you're going to die. And besides that, none of your children are ever going to be the king. Your dynasty will end with you. And it happened just as he said it would. And then he said, send a little message to your beloved wife, Jezebel. Tell her that she's not just going to die, but she's going to die a disgraceful death where dogs will lick up her blood in this spot where Naboth was killed. Because what happened when Naboth was stoned to death? Dogs came and licked up his blood. And that was kind of the ultimate as far as saying, wow, they deserve that. They got treated worse than a dog. And so God is saying it's going to happen to your wife who thinks she's better than everybody. She thinks nobody can touch her. And so one day, and this was a while later, another preacher of God came along, and he was called Jehu, and he was known for this one big fact. He was a crazy driver. He was a reckless driver. And so one day they see a cloud of dust coming down the desert, and the guy in the lookout people are saying, who's coming? What's all that dust from? And the guy goes, it's got to be Jezebel. He's driving like a madman. And so Jezebel comes in, Jehu comes in, and Jezebel comes up to the window of the palace, and he says, you are that woman who has taken Israel to the lowest place it's ever been, and you killed an innocent man. Somebody please deal with this woman. And somebody pushed her out the window. And she landed on the ground and died, and guess what? Dogs came in and licked up her blood at the exact spot where Naboth died and licked up her blood. So God is basically saying this. Your anger took you to places that caused you to do things that destroyed your life and ended any positive stuff in your life. And all of that says to me is, that should motivate me to want to deal with this anger stuff. This is not some little thing that's not a big deal.